นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening from Bodhipala Monastery, Adelaide, South Australia. Today I came to visit Bodhipala Monastery because earlier today we had a special ceremony to inaugurate the latest project of this monastery, that is to build chedi, or a monument or shrine to enshrine relics of the Buddha. But it's also a monument to remember our teacher, Ajahn Chah or Luang Por Chah. So it's basically it'll be a spire, the shape of a spire built on the hill overlooking the front of the monastery next to the lake. And we're fortunate to have a visit from the Thai ambassador, Kun Achari, as well, and the honorary Thai consul of South Australia as well. So they joined us. So the lay supporters of the monastery, together with the ambassador, but together with the monks, we had a ceremony just to bless the land where this chedi will be built and begin or inaugurate the project, which should continue now for the next year or two to build that monument. And this is something that many, as you probably know, many monasteries, temples around the world, particularly in Asia, particularly in Buddhist countries, but also outside Buddhist countries, chedis get built regularly. The Buddha once said that it's appropriate to build a chedi building to house the relics of a Buddha. Relics means bone fragments or fragments of the body, maybe after the cremation, will be collected, small fragments of bone collected, and these become relics. Sometimes they crystallize, change color, but whether they do or not, they're considered relics, something worthy of veneration. So then Buddhists, since the time of the Buddha, have built chedis to house Buddha relics. But the Buddha also said we can build chedis for the relics or bones of Pacceka Buddhas, Arahants, and even great emperors as well. So the building of chedis has gone on since the time of the Buddha. It's something that he allowed and said has a purpose, a useful purpose, because a Buddha or an Arahant, an enlightened being, we aspire to, as Buddhists, following the Noble Eightfold Path, we have the wish to realize the Four Noble Truths. Well, we follow in the footsteps of the Buddha and the Arahants, and so it's appropriate to build a monument to store their relics. What kind of monument we build, how big, how large, what materials we use, and so on, what design, artistic design or architectural design we use, well, that will depend, and they change over the ages. So the simplest chedis in the world are a mound of sand, maybe, that people bring and pile up, or a few rocks gathered and put together in that traditional sort of dome shape. Wood is less fashionable because wood doesn't last or can blow away or be damaged by fire or wind, rain. But even a Bodhi tree planted can be considered a form of chedi, because it symbolizes the tree, reminds us of the tree that the Buddha was enlightened under in northern India. So a Bodhi tree can be a form of chedi, or a Buddha statue. It's probably more common these days. All over the world, people build Buddha statues, big and small. They're considered a form of chedi, form of building. Often they're made out of quite solid materials such as stone, bronze, concrete, and so on. And they quite often will actually house relics of the Buddha. So the Buddha statue behind me here in the monastery, we had a ceremony to place Buddha relics in top knot, or the head, top part of the head of this Buddha statue. And that's the same for many, many monasteries and temples and halls in temples around the world. And they'll have Buddha relics in the head of the Buddha. So the Buddha itself, the statue, is like a chedi to house the relics of the Buddha. Of course, nowadays, the world is economically more developed. Building materials and methods have developed since the time of the Buddha. So chedis become more elaborate, larger, stronger, more elaborate. And in a way that's appropriate, because you want your chedi, if people come together, they sacrifice time, energy, money to build a chedi, you want it to last a long time. So it can be a benefit not just for one generation, but maybe for many generations of Buddhists who can come to worship at that chedi, to meditate, chant, circumambulate, listen to the Dhamma, and so on. All these useful, skillful activities can take place at a chedi, whether there's just a small area around the chedi that people can sit, meditate, or do walking meditation, or it's a more elaborate building with other walkways and covered buildings around it. Depends on the place and the kind of chedi, the design. The original design of chedis, they say, was based on a simple pile of cloth. Like monks, we have our robes that I'm wearing now. You'll see I have a robe over my shoulder, the sangati, the jiwara, the robe, the main robe. We have underrobes, we have shoulder cloths, and a few different robes. And when we store these robes, we fold them, and then we may pile them one on top of each other. And it's natural you have the biggest robe at the bottom of the pile, because it's the thickest and takes up most space. And then you put smaller robes on top of the bigger robe, getting up to the top of the pile, maybe the smallest piece of, like a face cloth or a small cloth that one might use for receiving things or storing things or wiping things. You have different sized pieces of cloth folded and then piled on top of each other, and that forms a very simple chedi. And then sometimes they take the bowl of the monk and they put that on top upside down. So you get the robes and bowl of a monk, which really is the only possessions a monk truly has that we're allowed when we're ordained. Although you may use other things, often these other possessions belong to the community as a whole rather than you individually. It's really only your bowl and robes are your possessions as a monk. That's what identify you as a monk, your uniform, you might say. So the upturned bowl on top of the pile of folded cloth forms a kind of roof or peak for this pile. So you'll see many of the older chedis in India, Sri Lanka, Burma, they have this sort of design with steps up and then a bowl shape. Sometimes it's called the upturned bell. So it's also like a bell when you have a bell that's just placed on top of the pile of robes. Either way, that's sort of a traditional shape for a chedi. But it depends on who's building it and what their intention is and what they want to emphasize artistically or spiritually. The main thing is the chedi is a place of worship where you store the relics of a Buddha or an Arahant. If you know the Mangala Sutta, the Sutta that Buddha gave the 38 blessings, the Devas came and asked him what are the highest blessings in life. And the first lines are Sewana cha balanang banditanang cha sewana puja cha puja niyanang etam mangalamutamang. Not to associate with fools, associate with the wise, and to venerate or worship those who are worthy or appropriate to venerate or worship. Puja cha puja niyanang. So we call a chedi a place of puja, place of worship. And if it houses the relics of a Buddha or an Arahant, enlightened being, then that's something we can worship through practicing meditation, listening to Dhamma, reciting suttas, chanting, and so on. Because is really the goal, isn't it? Like a chedi is the goal of the practice. It's a symbol of the highest goal. The enlightened mind of a Buddha or an Arahant is symbolic of, it symbolizes Nibbana. So the relics are symbolic of Nibbana. The goal of this practice, the highest peace, the highest happiness, the greatest emptiness, is that Nibbana is this quality that has it's the mind that is free from attachment, free from birth and death, free from suffering. What we aspire to as Buddhists. So a chedi is kind of symbolizes Nibbana. Sometimes nowadays people build chedis, they use them as garden ornaments. Or I've heard people will build a chedi just for anybody, a relative or even a pet, build pet chedis and so on. So nowadays, with the proliferation of wealth and people changing ideas, maybe chedis are used in different ways, but strictly speaking, according to the word of the Buddha, they're used to house the relics of a Buddha or an Arahant. So it's an important religious building. So here, Bodhipala Monastery has a number of hills within the area of the monastery. And Lumpur Liam, the abbot of Ajahn and Charles Monastery, Wat Nong Mapong, he came to visit and he pointed out that would be a good hill, the place where we're going to build this chedi. It will be a good place for a chedi. It sort of has a view over the lake at the front of the monastery. There's a view in all directions. It will be able to be seen and hopefully will inspire people in their practice. And that's what a chedi is for, it's to inspire. When I was a young monk and looking after Ajahn Chah, and then Ajahn Chah passed away. The day Ajahn Chah passed away, that same day, Ajahn Mahabua came to visit the monastery out of respect of our teacher Ajahn Chah. He travelled in a car for about 5 hours from his own monastery down to Ajahn Chah's monastery. Came to give support to Ajahn Chah's community of monks who were gathering once Ajahn Chah passed away. All the monks were there, and they had a meeting actually after he passed away and decided to build a chedi. They had a spot in the monastery, and within 1 year the chedi for Ajahn Chah was built, and it's still there today. And Ajahn Mahabua came and stayed in the monastery for a night and gave some teachings and encouragement. And I was helping to look after him, and at one point he took me aside when no one was around, and he said, "Look, your teacher's passed away. I realize you're sad and you might be lacking a bit of energy now, and you'll have a hard time for this next period because your teacher's gone." I had the same feeling when my teacher, Lumpur Man, who also was one of Ajahn Chah's teachers. When Luang Por Man passed away, he said he felt like he really lost something. A bit of his heart kind of dropped out. He lost inspiration for a moment in his practice. He said the way he dealt with it is he went off and practiced even harder. After they had had the funeral, he went off into the forest and practiced, put more effort into his meditation, and really wanted to realize the same Dhamma, to realize the Four Noble Truths, just as Luang Por Man had taught and realized. So he turned to me and he said, you should do the same. You know, your teacher has passed away and they'll be building this chedi for him, which is correct. We believe Ajahn Chah was an arahant. But don't spend the rest of your life just hanging around the chedi like a hungry ghost. It's the term he used. Sweeping the chedi, kind of moping around, doing nothing. Once the chedi's built, the funeral's finished, go away and meditate a lot. Devote your life to the practice of meditation for purifying your mind of greed, anger, and delusion. So that's the best way to worship your teacher. The word we call it is patipati puja. You know, we place a lot of emphasis on amisa puja. You know, amisa means material wealth, and showing our devotion, our worship to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, through our material offerings. We go out and earn money in the world and gather wealth, and then we do offer that to monasteries, monks, groups of monks, build monasteries, and of course monasteries take some funding and support to build and run. So it's all a good thing, but Venerable Ajahn Mahabua was emphasizing that actually the most important kind of worship is the practice of developing sila, keeping precepts, developing samadhi, developing states of calm, one-pointedness, and developing insight or wisdom, sila, samadhi, panya. Cultivating these qualities is the best kind or the highest kind of worship. So his teaching to me that day when Ajahn Chah died was, you know, they'll build a chedi, but don't spend your life looking after the chedi. Once it's built, use it as a reference point, but then go and practice and develop your meditation to liberate your mind from the causes of suffering. This is the most important purpose of the Buddhist teachings, is to give us a way, a method to liberate our mind from greed, anger, delusion, craving and attachment, which are the causes of suffering. So a chedi symbolizes that, but it's really just something that you see to remind you to do more practice. There's no more important teaching than the reminder to cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, for the end of suffering, for removing mental defilements rooted in greed, anger, and delusion from our mind, so that we can experience the same liberation as chedis, or the relics of the arahants and the Buddhas in the chedis. Of course, we try to build a chedi as solidly as well as we can. It's an artistic ornament also to remind us of the beautiful mind, the enlightened mind, remind us of the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha. And nowadays, people will try to build a chedi really solid, which is good. It can last a long time, but like any other building in the world, no building lasts forever because it's man-made, it's created. It's still what we call a sankhara, creation. You know, there's somebody with a design in their head, a monk or an architect has a design, they put it on paper, and then the builder comes along and builds to that design. So it's a created thing, and all created things have a start and they have a finish, meaning they come into being when you create them and build them. They're there for a while, and maybe a long while. A chedi can last for hundreds of years, perhaps. But then they slowly decline, pass away, and crumble or collapse, perhaps. So even chedis are impermanent. However well they're made, however large and impressive they are, they're still impermanent structures. That's another teaching, isn't it? It's a teaching of impermanence, that even the chedi will one day fall over or collapse. Sometimes the collapse is speeded up by nature, so the weathering effect of wind and rain and sun on the chedi. Sometimes even humans destroy chedis, people who don't have any faith in the Buddha. Sometimes nature has its own way of showing impermanence, so chedis can crack in an earthquake and crumble, or damaged by floods, fire, wind. Sometimes they slip off their high point into a river or a lake or the sea. So chedis don't last forever, and they're a reminder that everything is impermanent. What often happens is you build a chedi, like, the older chedis in the world were built in India, Burma, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, even, and then in other countries, Afghanistan, Tibet, and into China. And one chedi may be built in one era, and then it collapses, and then another wealthy patron, a king or a group of people with some funds come along and they rebuild the same chedi on the site of the original chedi. So in India, we have quite a few chedis, and in other places that where they were built and they collapsed and they were rebuilt, sometimes 4, 5, 6 times on the same spot. It's a testament to the effort and energy and the faith of Buddhists from successive generations who they're aware there's a chedi there, maybe with relics, housing relics of the Buddha, and they want to get it back again. If it's fallen over or collapsed, well, they say, well, we should rebuild it. And so people do rebuild one on top of another. And sometimes the archaeologists find this, they find these different layers of chedis that have been built over the centuries. Just like Bodhi trees as well. Bodhi trees will often grow up and survive for 100 or 200 years, and then they also will fall over. Branches fall, maybe the tree is hit by lightning or damaged by people or insects. It might fall over, but then often a new shoot will arise on the site of the original tree. So they say the Bodhi tree in India, where the Buddha was enlightened, is now next to a great chedi, the Mahabodhi stupa. That Bodhi tree, where the Buddha was enlightened, is maybe the 4th or 5th generation. The original one was damaged. One of them that grew up, became a place of worship for the Emperor Asoka, and his wife actually got jealous that the great emperor who became Buddha, a Buddhist later in his life, and would go and meditate at the Bodhi tree where the Buddha himself was enlightened. And he did a lot of works to build up monuments and temples in that place and in other places. It was a golden era because Asoka was a Buddhist emperor. And he would meditate at the Bodhi tree. So his wife got annoyed with that, jealous of him. So she tried to poison the tree and damaged it, but didn't kill it. And then another point, a Hindu king who wasn't a Buddhist came in and tried to damage it. So sometimes people have their own reasons to damage Bodhi trees, but the Bodhi tree kept growing. And then there was also one occasion lightning struck it, it was damaged, and then it regrew. So whether it's a chedi or a Bodhi tree, often there's a period of where that chedi or that Bodhi tree is thriving, and then it may decline or disappear, and then someone comes along and rebuilds, or the tree itself regenerates. So even though Buddhism talks about impermanence, it doesn't mean to say everything disappears from the world. Well, if there are still people with faith, then chedis can be rebuilt, Bodhi trees can be regrown, and so on. just like in our own hearts and mind, like as you practice, you'll find there's times when your faith in the Buddha and the teachings is strong, and you put forth a lot of effort. Try meditating maybe every day, try to keep the precepts every day. And you listen to Dhamma and put forth effort. Maybe you practice dana, making offerings regularly for a period of time. And then maybe your faith wanes, or you get distracted by other things, more worldly pursuits, perhaps. Or your effort, your energy drops. And so just in one person's lifetime, one's faith and energy can come up, and then we get distracted, sidetracked by life, and our faith fades. Sometimes conditions change, so you see that sometimes people fall ill. Some people with strong faith, their faith carries them through their illness, and they keep practicing. They don't lose faith, and they find the faith in the Buddha and his teachings actually supports them greatly. Other people, they experience illness or injury, and then they turn away from Buddhism, almost like blaming the Buddhist teachings for not helping them in that situation. And the same with sort of things like people's material wealth. Somebody goes broke, or they lose their job, or lose money. Sometimes they lose their faith and give up practicing, or turn away from the Buddhist teachings, maybe disappointed with the failure they've encountered at a certain time in their life, and so on. Sometimes the Buddha pointed out, though, that when we encounter suffering, illness, or lose our job, go into debt, or we have suffering in a relationship, and the relationship collapses, breaks up. For some people, the suffering is the time when they turn to the practice, makes them look and want to practice even more than before. So that's like in the Upanishad Sutta, where the Buddha said, suffering can be the cause for seeking out a spiritual path, seeking out the Dhamma, seeking out the Buddha. And when you encounter suffering, it's then that you turn to wanting to listen to the Dhamma, asking questions, listening or reading the Dhamma, listening to the Dhamma, and then wanting to begin practicing. So suffering can be the cause for faith to arise. Faith leads to effort, patience and effort, putting effort into the practice of dana, sila, bhavana, developing samadhi and insight. And all these good qualities start to arise as faith and effort come up. Then we start to experience tranquility, peace of mind, and the joy of practice. And this can pull us out of our experience of suffering. And from there, because the mind is in a better space, we understand the Dhamma better and start letting go of attachment. See our attachment to different negative mind states, attachment to our physical body, attachment to our material possessions are actually, we can see these things are all impermanent, and start letting go. So suffering is not always the end of one's faith and practice. It can be the beginning, which is a positive thing. And it's a very common thing you hear nowadays, like the world is a wealthier place, even though there's still plenty of suffering in the world. But generally, human beings, we're a little wealthier than we used to be. We have more material comfort. We have homes. Many people will have a home, plenty of food, money in their pocket, a phone, a computer, a car. These things are all very normal in society now. Not everyone has everything, but generally speaking, we do. And so people become very attached to their comforts, and they don't have a lot of serious suffering until they encounter some illness or injury or something, perhaps. So because people don't have a lot of suffering, there's this saying now, people are not practicing the Dhamma because they haven't yet seen suffering. So don't be afraid of suffering, because suffering often is the trigger that nudges you into the practice. And sometimes the monks kind of say, when maybe some parents come to the monastery and they say, my kids are not interested in Buddhism, they're not practicing, what can I do? Sometimes the answer is just wait until they start suffering, and then they'll listen. They'll be more interested to listen to the Dhamma. They'll be more interested into finding ways to deal with their stress, their suffering. When we're young, we're physically healthy, and the Buddha pointed out, or we often get intoxicated with our good health, our physical energy. We can go here, go there. We're confident. We try things. We learn new things. So often people don't think of practicing the Dhamma when they're young. They're too busy traveling, working, earning money, having fun. But later in life, when they do start to experience a bit of suffering, maybe when they want to buy a house and they've suddenly got a mortgage or debt, or they have a relationship and they have the trouble of learning how to live with another person, or they have kids and they've got to learn how to live with kids and deal with their kids, and so on. Or people, make money and then they lose money, or they have a job and then they lose their job. As people live their life longer, of course, suffering slips into their experience. So then maybe it's then that they start to turn to the Dhamma. All of this depends on the individual, doesn't it? But a chedi is a place you build as a kind of beacon, as a reminder to everyone that, well, there is such a thing as enlightenment, enlightened beings, Buddhas, Arahants. They exist, and when they die, their bones become relics, and so we build a chedi for their relics, and that reminds everyone else to keep practicing. They say it's great merit to support the building of a chedi because it is such a symbolic building and has such a powerful effect on people's minds, brings up the faith, the happiness, that many people, they come into the monastery, immediately they feel happier and more peaceful. It's quite a normal experience, because their life is often full of stress, worries, burdens. When they come into the monastery, it's like, oh, you can let the burden go. And if they see a chedi, that can bring this sense of confidence and faith up. Many people, when they meditate at a chedi, such as Ajahn Chah's chedi in Ubon, northeast Thailand, they go there, they meditate, they often get very peaceful in their meditation, sitting near the bones of the teacher. The bones of the teacher can have that effect. Whether you have them on a shrine or in a chedi, you can go and sit and meditate Ajahn Chah's chedi, or a chedi where there are Buddha relics in any part of the world, and quite often it's the faith that is brought up brings your mind to peace, one-pointedness, and your meditation develops well in that space. So hopefully that can be the case here at Bodhipala Monastery. We began the project to build a chedi and be a source of inspiration, strength, energy, faith for people, and hopefully in the future people will come and meditate and find some real peace and samadhi and some real insight, and maybe even become enlightened one day. So we wish that for you listening tonight, and also for all the future generations of Buddhists who can come to Bodhipala Monastery. So I'll end the talk there, and there's time afterwards. If anyone has any questions, we can answer the questions.
อันตมายังอุวัตคทาสาตุคารังตัตมาเสสาธุสาธุสาธุอะนะโมทามิ